I just wanted to mention to you guys, we do have cost share programs available for things on your farm, anything from like high tunnels to grazing distributions for water and fencing. We also are getting more involved with forestry. So if you guys would like us to come out and do a visit with you on your forest land, feel free to give us a call. I won't take up too much time because I know this stuff is more important. Yes, sir.
Carl, do you work with Carl?
Yes, I work with Carl.
Carl called me yesterday, very quickly. Would you please tell him to call me back?
Yes, I have a meeting with him in the morning, so I'll have him call you. Yes. And then Keith Richmond with the Farm Service Agency could not be here, but he did ask me to go over a couple of things with you all. You have 15 days to notify FSA if you all have lost any livestock or bees with your beehives to qualify for their LIP program, livestock something program, or ELAP, which is the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program. So if you are in Fayette County and below, contact him at the Beckley office. If you're in Nicholas County, you would contact
That's what.
yes, there you go. So that's all that I have. I just wanted to mention that to you again. You have 15 days to get any losses reported in to them to qualify for one of their programs.
All right.
Thank you.
You guys got anything to say? Division Forestry, Matt?
Well, this is Cody Mullins, he's the Fayette County Service Forester. If you have anything anybody wants to talk about, we brought a notepad and we'll answer any questions or take any requests later, forestry or tree, insect, logging, anything like that. So after it's all said and done, if you got something, just come see us and we'll try to get you taken care of.
Now, Cody, you're covering Fayette County now, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And your office is out of where?
We're out of Beckley.
Out of Beckley. Okay. So this is Service Forester now to cover the new Fayette County area. Jack Spencer's over in Nicholas County. And so we're going to do a Meet the Forester program coming up in March. We haven't set a date, but it'll probably be with the Career and Technical School, the forestry class, Mr. Bennett, and we'll go in more depth to the programs that are available to landowners in the forest industry, and the Division Forester will be part of that coming up in March. We haven't set the date yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. Yep. We'll get that going. So, miss anybody else? Okay, so tonight is stepping outside the bounds, and I appreciate you all coming out to this and looking at some managing stress on the farm is basically what it's about. And it's going to go some different angles, and we all have it. There's no jokes. I mean, we've been there. We've been through one of the, what I think, some of you may disagree, but one of the wettest seasons so far that I've had to mess around in the mud, that's for sure. And that wears on you. That wears on you. Price volatility wears on you. Livestock losses wears on you. And then the everyday things also wear on you. So I think we're going to touch base with that. We've got two speakers with us tonight. Jody Richmond is an extension agent in Mercer County. Jody's been with the Extension Service for 18 plus years. No stranger to the ag community, that's for sure. And then Amy Cook is the extension agent out of Clay and Braxton. They're gonna tag team this to look at this. Amy probably is more on the family and health end of things. That's the unit that she works out of, and Jody is an agriculture agent also. So I'm going to turn it over to you. I notice we may have to dim some lights here. Feel free, the restrooms are back there if you need to work through that. And I'm going to pass out some sign-in sheets. I need you to sign these in, sign up. And if you don't receive anything from us, please put your mailing address. If you do not receive something from us, put your mailing address. But if you do, don't worry about filling out your mailing address. But the other thing I'd like to have is if you have an email address. I need to get that started a little better in my database. So there's some pens and pencils floating around. I'll pass one down each side if you'll just fill those out. And I'll turn that over to you, Jody and Amy.
And we're going to use a certificate
certificate for completing the course. So however you want, whatever name you want on that certificate, that's what you want to put on the sign-in sheet so that I can fill those out correctly. And make sure that each of you signs in instead of just one of you if you came with a couple or something like that. So everybody gets their certificate. Well, thank you so much for having us today. We are going to talk about some things that maybe sometimes are not so easy to talk about. We're going to talk about stress and mental health and even a little bit about suicide. So we hope that you guys will feel comfortable talking to us today, talking about yourselves, talking about some of the things that we're talking about. If you happen, if it stirs up any emotions or something else that you'd like to talk about a little privately, then that's okay too. We're willing to stay as long as you need us to this evening. But the main thing is we want you to all feel comfortable today, and we want you to talk as a group, to talk individually. So make sure if you have questions or if you have things that you want to add from your own personal life, feel free to jump in and let's talk about it as we go along, okay? Don't let it bother you if you can't see the slides because it's okay. We'll be kind of telling you the important stuff on the slides. If you would like a copy of the slides later, just let us know and we can get that to you, okay? All right, so I want to start off with just, why do you guys farm? Is anybody in here a first-generation farmer? Okay, so everybody in here, their parents and their grandparents already farm, right? Does anybody want to tell me why you want to farm?
Crazy.
What? Well, maybe sometimes when you're feeling a little down and things just aren't working, sometimes you feel like, why do I keep doing this? But why are the benefits? Why do you want to farm? What kind of things make you feel good about being a farmer or having high tunnels or whatever type of agriculture you're involved in? Why do you enjoy it?
Like he said, it's crazy. I just love it.
Just love it. What do you love about it?
Everything.
Everything?
Yep, I don't care if it's plowing, cleaning something up, whatever.
All right, a lot of people love just working the land. You love the life that you have. You know where your food comes from. Anything else?
We like to be alone.
Like to be alone. I think there is something to have a solace to yourself. Even, a lot of people like to get out there on a tractor or they like to walk among their animals and check things. Anybody else have something they want to add to that? All right, so first of all, farming can be really good for your health too. We're going to talk about some stress and some bad things that can happen, but there's a lot of really good things about farming. You know where your food comes from. You can be at peace out there walking around on your land. Sometimes it just makes you feel good to be outside and be happy, right? So it can be really good for yourself, but it can be challenging sometimes. It can give you the benefits of exercise, right? We're going to talk about some of the times where it can be stressful, but it can also be really good for you. You get out there and you get some work every day. Income. Anybody ever make money farming? Nobody's volunteering, right? It can be a source of income for some people. It's good to pass it on to the younger generation. Any of you grandparents who really enjoy seeing your kids and your grandkids out there playing with the animals or anything like that? Okay, some people really want to pass that down to their kids, right? It can be good for the environment, right? We're really stewards of the environment and we want to take care of the earth. Some people say they keep their farm just because they don't want to see it divided into subdivisions, right? A lot of people have passion and a respect for the land. All right, so we're going to see if this will play out. Can you hear that? Does anybody recognize what it is? Anybody recognize it?
How hard?
Okay, I'll stop it there. But that is the speech Paul Harvey gave, Why God Made a Farm, okay? It was actually from the 1976 FFA convention, but you probably are a lot more familiar with it from the truck commercial, right? Okay. So a lot of the farm are just really passionate and really enjoy being a farmer, right? Okay. However, it can be stressful, all right? Not just farming, but But whatever you do can be stressful, right? So some of the symptoms and the results of stress can be things like emotional. You could be a little irritable. You can have a little anxiety. Some of us cry when we get a little upset. Or you might get to more extremes where you start to have depression or even feel a little hopeless. Some of the behavioral things that are very common with farmers is they start to neglect themselves. You're so busy that you can't take care of yourself, okay? That can be things like you don't get enough sleep. Maybe you're not taking a shower on a regular basis. Anybody know somebody that maybe is not showering quite enough? Relationship problems. That happens sometimes with husbands and wives. You kind of get a little snippy with each other, and then you start to realize that you maybe haven't even talked to each other in a day or two because you've been kind of snippy and you're just not getting along that well. Negative thoughts, impatience. Anybody want to admit that they have some of these feelings sometimes? Okay? Some of us readily admit it, right?
Oh, have them all. Why would we have that?
Well, you've already told me that you just are so in love with your wife, so
Oh, yeah.
you know, some of us can relax and really enjoy ourselves. Okay? Some other things that you might have are the physical signs, like tension in your muscles. Anybody ever get a stress headache? Anybody ever had that? Okay. Weight gain or loss. Anybody ever put on a few pounds they didn't really mean to? Yeah, maybe indigestion or ulcers. It's not blood pressure. Anybody have high blood pressure? Okay. 70% of the chronic health concerns that we have, things like diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure, can be related to stress. Okay, so helping to control your stress can control some of those chronic health concerns. Okay? So how do you cope with stress? Does anybody have a way they want to share that they cope with stress? I eat. You eat?
I farm.
Yeah, I do too. Sometimes you eat too much. Sometimes you eat too little. You said you farm. That helps you deal with stress. Anybody else have something they do? Alcohol, that's on the list too. Sometimes we may go a little too far with alcohol. Read my Bible. Excellent, read your Bible. Sometimes reading is very comforting, as well religion. What did you say?
Holler at your spouse.
Holler at your spouse, okay. All right, so
I'm deaf in one ear.
are you really deaf or are you selective hearing?
Selective hearing.
All right, so some of the unhealthy ones, let's talk about these first, are poor eating habits, either too much or too little. Sleep, anybody not getting enough sleep? All right, they make these Fitbits. Anybody have a Fitbit? And they monitor how much sleep you get at night, and it tells you your sleep score. How many hours of sleep are we supposed to get a night?
8, 6.
7 to 8 is supposed to be ideal. Anybody in here getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night? Probably not. 7 to 8 is, you do? Well, excellent. 7 to 8 is what you're supposed to get, and it should be continuous in general. If you wear these, you find out you really don't get continuous sleep. A lot of times you wake up a lot at night. Avoiding your family or friends. This could be a good one or a bad one. If some of your family and friends are stressful, then maybe you need to avoid them. Okay? Caffeine, junk food. Anybody tend to partake in some of those things? Spending too much money. Anybody have a shopping habit? No. I'm talking to the guys. Anybody in here buying tractors? Okay. All right.
You don't count.
So some healthier habits that you might have. Controlled breathing. Anybody do yoga? Anybody do goat yoga? Okay, goat yoga is a big thing right now. So controlled breathing. Yeah, it is. Sleep management. Eating a healthy diet. Doing things that you enjoy, regardless of what that is. Okay? All right. So now we're going to talk about something that's a little bit harder to discuss. All right, so this is an actual excerpt from a suicide note that a farmer left his wife. The only thing I'll regret leaving is the children and you. Farming has brought me a lot of memories, some happy, but most grief. Grief is finally won out. The low prices, bills piling up, and just everything. Kids deserve better, and so do you. I just don't know how to do it. This is all I know, and it's no good anymore.
Okay, do you think that he really felt like that all the time, or do you think he was just having a rough patch?
Probably rough patch.
Okay, we all go through some really rough times, right? And this is one of the things that we're going to talk a lot about today, is the majority of people that commit suicide are not just people that are depressed all the time. They may have bouts of depression, but in general, they're just going through a rough patch. And if we can recognize that somebody is struggling and try to get them the help when they need it, then they can get through that and go on to be okay. All right, so that's what we're going to kind of talk about. So here's some facts that I want to give you. Suicide rates are much higher in rural areas than they are in urban areas. The U.S. suicide rate is 13 suicide deaths per 100,000 people per year. The U.S. male suicide rate is 20,000 deaths per 100,000 people per year.
That's America.
Now, I don't have any data comparing married versus not married. All right, but I do have data on how likely you are to get help if you have a wife that will help you get there. So we'll get to that here in a minute. All right, here's the important part. Male farmer suicide rates are 34 per 100,000. So male farmer suicide rates are almost 3 times higher than the average suicide rate. Okay, so that's a fact that's really significant there. Male farmer suicide rates are 3 times higher than the average suicide rate. Now, one of the reasons that this is really significant is one of the highest suicide rates is among white men over 55. Why is that significant? What is the demographic in West Virginia that is most likely to be farming? Male white men over 55. That is the highest demographic that's likely to commit suicide. All right, so, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but I did want to make one more statement. We're going to talk a little bit about men and suicide rates. This is not to be sexist or because we consider men more important than females. That's not at all the case. But I want to point out, and you can't probably see my pointer from here, female farmer suicide rates is only 6 per 100,000. And that is pretty much on average with non-farmer female suicide rates. So there is not a statistically increased rate between regular females and farmer females. And the female suicide rate is far less than the male suicide rate. Okay, so most of this program we're talking about males because that rate is so much higher, 34 compared to 6, okay? All right, so how do these suicides occur? In countries where firearms are available, like ours, firearms are by far the most common means of suicide. In the United States, I think it's 66% of suicides are due to firearms. And how many of you have guns at your house? Okay. The majority of rural households in West Virginia have a firearm. Okay? In countries where firearms are not available, other methods, including hanging and medicinal overdoses, are the most common means. Drug overdose is the second highest cause in the United States. Okay, so what are some unique stressors that you guys think farmers have? What are some stressors that you might have on the farm?
Bills.
Bills, finances. What kind of bills? Feed bills, seed bills. Okay, what else?
Weather.
Weather. Oh, that weather doesn't affect you, does it?
Can't keep the fence.
The fence, yep, can't keep the fence built, can't keep the animals in. What else?
Dealing with your family members or people you work with.
Family! Oh, they don't get on your nerves, do they?
Oh, yeah, I said it.
And you said employees, that could be another one, or people that work with you.
Your neighbors.
Neighbors, oh, that's a good one too.
Boundary was.
Okay, we need one more.
Extension agent.
Extension agents. They keep driving you nuts. Okay, I need a volunteer.
Jump up, Larry.
Come on up. Oh, I need you in a minute. Somebody else, come on up. Come on. I'm gonna need 2 of you, so come on up. Come on, I won't hurt you. Okay, so you're gonna stand here. All right, so these are all the things that are going on in her life.
I can't juggle.
I know. Okay, you're gonna try to do all 6 of them at the same time. All right, keep throwing. Okay, can she juggle all 6 of these at the same time?
You all.
No. Okay, I need one more person. Come on up. Come on, just come on up, somebody. Come on, would you help her, sir? Come on, somebody else, come on. Okay, you grab her.
My daughter could come and help me.
Okay. So, the 2 of you, now you're going to try to, both of you try to keep them all in the air. Okay, this is trying to symbolize, okay, now she's got somebody else in her family. She needs some more help, so somebody else in her family is going to try to help her. Okay, she's having a better time right now, but can she still juggle all 6? She's still struggling a little bit, right?
Very
All right, Kate, come on up. Kate, come on. Okay, now this is to symbolize that maybe she gets somebody else involved. Maybe she calls in RCS to see if they can help her with one of their programs. Or maybe she calls the Farm Service Agency. Or maybe she asks the extension agent to come out and look at something. Or maybe she calls another family member. All right, now see if the 3 of you can juggle all 6 of these.
Most people are too embarrassed though to ask for help.
Exactly. Okay, so try to keep it in the air. Y'all 3 drop them over. Okay, she still may be
And
struggling.
then your family makes fun of you.
And then your family makes fun of her.
Government employee.
The whole point of this is when you have a lot to do, sometimes you need help. Okay? And sometimes you may need help from a professional, or sometimes you may need help from somebody that has a different area of expertise than what you have. Okay? And sometimes it's really hard for us to ask for help. All right, thank you. Thank you. So never be afraid to ask for help when you need it. And sometimes you need help from somebody else. Maybe you need help from a therapist or a religious advisor because maybe you just need to talk about something. Maybe you have a lot of stuff inside of you and you're really struggling and you just need to get that out. Okay? Or maybe you need to talk to somebody that has a different area of expertise than you do. Okay? So some of you unique stressors. Okay, one of the things that a lot of farm owners really worry about is losing the family farm. Okay? Particularly if it's been in your family for generations. There's a lot of emotions tied up to your farm. And if you get to the point where you're financially struggling, that can be extremely stressful. And that's one of the things that occurs commonly that we see in a lot of suicides is that there's a financial concern there. Okay? Health crisis. This is another thing that happens a lot. As people get older, they're starting to struggle more with maintaining the farm, with continuing to do all the things that they need to do. Weather. Somebody over here mentioned that a minute ago. Weather might cause a crop loss. Or maybe it's in the summertime and you got hay down and you just can't get it put up because it's so wet. Machinery. Anybody ever have trouble with their machinery? Breaking down? Do you guys have somebody in this area that's pretty good about fixing stuff? Do you have somewhere you can take your machinery to if you need it? Some areas don't have that. Some areas don't have a good vet that will come out and even take care of large animals when you need it. Older farmers generally report higher stress levels. Female farmers report higher stress levels. We said that the risk of suicide was lower, but actually female farmers report higher stress levels than male farmers, generally because they also have more of a family dynamic component that they have to take care of. They're generally managing more of the household tasks as well as the farm tasks as well. On average, livestock producers have higher stress levels than crop producers. Why would that be?
Fix the fence.
Gotta fix the fence. You gotta pull a calf. You worked all night to try to save these 2 lambs and you try to bottle feed them and they died anyway. Okay, so there's a whole added layer when you're dealing with an animal that's got its own mind and it's going to do all these other things that you can't control. Okay, what is it about a man that would make a man more at risk for stress and for suicide than a woman?
He's the breadwinner, normally.
Okay, there's this perception that he's got to be the one that takes care of the family and he has to provide for the family. What else?
We don't share our feelings.
Excellent. They don't feel like they're comfortable sharing feelings, or maybe they've always been taught that they don't share feelings. They're not allowed to cry. They're not allowed to talk about things that make them feel bad. Anything else? You guys have hit on a lot of these. Okay, some of these, just being a male makes you have a higher barrier to health care. They feel like they can't ask for help. Limited access to health care. This is one of the problems we have in rural West Virginia. There are places where there's just not a good place to go even if you need help.
Or they don't know where to go.
They don't know where to go. Exactly. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the newer services that we have now, like telehealth and those kind of things. Or maybe you don't know what kind of therapist is out there that can help you. Or if you need to see a medical doctor, those type of things. Multiple stressors. You guys kind of hit on that a minute ago. You got a fence down, you got weather problems, prices are low. There's a lot going on in your life at the same time, and how do you control all those balloons in the air at the same time? Lack of a close confidant. Think about it yourself. We're going to ask you a few questions like this in a minute. But if you're having a problem, do you have somebody that you feel comfortable talking to? That's another thing that is a risk factor for suicide, is if, say, you have a best friend and something happens to your best friend, that increases your chance of suicide. If your best friend or your father or your son or whoever was that close confidant for you dies or moves away or something like that, that increases a person's chance of suicide because they've just lost the one person they thought they could talk to. Okay? And also depressive disorders, things like depression or anxiety or things like that as well. Okay, we do have one suspicious finding that we don't really understand quite what the data is saying here, but they have cited some long-term exposures to specific agricultural chemicals like pesticides that have been linked a little bit to mood disorders in farmers. And we're hesitant to really say what that is until they do some more studies on that, but there have been some links cited by some studies. Seasonality, okay? We all kind of know this already. Like when you have longer hours of daylight, you generally feel better. When you have longer hours of darkness, people tend to feel a little worse, okay? And it's not too clear about that, but the other thing is there's more risk for depression and suicides around, like when your crop's coming in during planting time and in harvest time. Why would that be?
Gotta get it done.
You gotta get it done, and you're really stressed, and things might go wrong. And what happens when something goes wrong? You get overwhelmed, okay? So those periods of time when you're starting to get really overwhelmed, and you have to do this all by yourself, and it's not going right, that's when you're gonna have a higher chance.
Weatherman getting it wrong.
Weatherman getting it wrong. You relied on him, and it didn't work out wrong, okay? So just the nature of farm work. You know, some of you may only hit income once or twice a year. You know, if you don't have a really diversified crop and you're just relying on your animal production or something like that, you may be waiting a long time in between your income coming in. Does your bills wait on that? You know, is it okay to call the power company and say, you know, I need to wait until August to pay you? Will they wait? No, they don't care, do they? So just the nature of farm work, it's physically and mentally demanding, right? We talked about that exercise could be good for you, but too much stress is not good for you, okay? It is physically and mentally demanding. And the fact that if you're resistant to seek help, then it's hard for you to get help. But you also, like Brian mentioned, you may not know where to go even when you want help. So we're going to talk a little more about that. Here's a little finding that we did realize. A lot of the work on farmer suicides has been done primarily in Australia and in Europe. It's only been the last 10 years that we've really started looking at this data in the United States. So when we do start looking at these numbers, 6 out of 10 instances of suicide, there was some kind of indication that somebody made some comment or there was some clue that somebody was probably going to do this. Okay, when we look back, there was a clue that somebody was going to commit suicide. Okay? But in many of those instances, that person didn't have a mood disorder, like they had not been diagnosed with depression or anxiety. Okay, so that goes back to the slide we were talking about a little while ago, when somebody was just struggling, okay? They were just overwhelmed. It wasn't like they had a long-term depression incident. They were just struggling and they were just overwhelmed. So if we can find people when they're struggling and when they're overwhelmed, and if we can get them help, the majority of those people will be okay. All right. So we haven't historically had suicide education programs in the United States geared towards farmers. That's why we're here now. And we're going to talk a little bit about a program called QPR, and Amy's going to explain a lot more about that. WVU Extension, we just started doing some programming geared towards this, and we got a grant, and we're working on that. This is our first outreach for that program. So we're here to try to help people when they are most likely to need the help. And it's basically because if we're waiting on somebody else to tell us they need help, if we're waiting on a man to come to us and say, look, I need help, I'm feeling suicidal, we're not going to catch that person at the right time.
Is
Okay?
it prevalent? I mean, how many in West Virginia?
We don't have good data on that.
Oh.
And that's one of the other things that we're looking into right now. One of the issues with suicide is sometimes suicides are masked as something else. Mm-hmm. Sometimes somebody just drives their truck off the hill. Mm-hmm. Sometimes somebody just takes an overdose of their heart medication. Sometimes somebody just drives into a traffic or something like that, or rolls their tractor over. So we don't even have good data as far as the number of suicides we have. Unfortunately, just in extension, we know of probably, I could name about 6 people I know in West Virginia that are farmers that have committed suicide in the last 5 years. So we know of cases where it's happened, but as far as actual statistics, we don't really have that good data yet.
What about the veterans? How much you got on that stuff?
There's tons of work on veterans. Yeah. And that of course is another highly vulnerable population. Yeah. Okay, so the ideal treatment for someone who needs it would be completely confidential. So they can feel like they can go and talk to somebody and their family doesn't have to find out if they don't want to. It needs to be easily accessible. That goes back to what Brian's saying. Do we even have treatment facilities available? And that's one of the things that we're hoping to be able to give you is we're trying to compile a list of resources available in each county or each region so that we can provide those for people that need help. It needs to be affordable, or really it needs to be free, because then anybody can access it when they need it. It needs to be safe and effective, easy to find. We're talking a lot about a mouse click away, and what we mean by that is a lot of people are really into internet help right now, or telemed, particularly since COVID. A lot of people have gotten used to using those type of services, and then nobody has to know, and they don't require a visit to somewhere else. They can get on immediately. Require no transportation. Again, internet services work really well for that. And they need to feel like they're talking to somebody that understands them. That's delivered by someone who is like me, somebody that understands a rural population, that understands a farmer, that kind of thing. Okay, so the really important part, what we're talking to you today, is we want you to be able to understand when you hear somebody and you start to be concerned that somebody might be suicidal, We want you to feel comfortable talking to them. You don't have to be a mental health expert. You're not going to be a counselor. We just want you to be able to recognize that that person is really struggling and be willing to get them help, okay? You don't have to be the help. You just recognize that that person needs help, okay? So you just care enough to intervene and try to get them help. And you can't read that, but it says, farming teaches us how to be totally responsible and completely powerless at the same time, okay? My friend Alex always says that farming is the only time where you buy everything at retail, sell everything at wholesale, and then you have to pay the shipping both ways. So at farming, we are working all the time, and you feel like you're almost getting taken advantage of. And this is kind of, like I said, when you've pulled 2 lambs and you're trying to save them and you're up all night and it still doesn't work and you kind of in your heart already knew that they were going to die anyway, but you felt like you had to try, okay? So you can feel totally hopeless sometimes, but yet the next time it happens, you're going to do it again, just because you feel like you have to try. Okay, so some things I want you to kind of think about just for yourself. Think about just for a second. Who could you count on to listen to you if you really needed somebody to talk to? Does each person in the room, think about for yourself, do you have somebody that you could talk to if you really needed somebody to listen to you? Who could you count on to console you if you were really, really upset? And then this is probably the really important one. Who can you count on to help you in a crisis, even though they would have to go out of their way to do it? And I hope everybody here has somebody that would be willing to step up and help you, even if they had to go out of their way to do it. So we just had a little window of opportunity, because most suicidal people will show some type of warning sign, okay? And we'll show you a little bit of what those are. We use this term gatekeeper, and a gatekeeper is somebody that recognizes those signs and gets them help. Okay, it's just an ordinary person that's gone through this training like we're talking about today, and they recognize that, oh, wait a minute, I just heard something and I need to be concerned. This sounds really serious and I care about you and I want you to get help, okay? That's what we're talking about, a gatekeeper. A gatekeeper is somebody that's been through this training and understands this is a problem, I'm really worried about this person and I want to get them help. Gatekeepers can be trained to recognize suicidal warning signs and intervene for someone that they know. Gatekeepers can be fully supported by the community-based healthcare mental providers. You're not an expert. You are not there to counsel somebody, and it is not your responsibility. You don't have the training to do that. But we need to help you figure out where you could take somebody and who could provide counseling for somebody that needs it.
If you ask someone, do you think they're going to be honest enough to say, yeah, I'm thinking about suicide? I don't think so.
I think in general they will be.
Most people that commit suicide, their friends and family have no idea. And so,
But if you look at the actual situation, when you look back, when we talk about warning signs, it's, did you see any of these signs? And did you have conversations? It's opening up that conversation with somebody. Are you feeling really bad? We'll talk about these actual questions here in a minute. Are you feeling really bad? Are you feeling like you might hurt yourself? Are you feeling so sad that you might do something? And if somebody is really suicidal, sometimes they just want to talk. I'm not saying everybody will, but sometimes people just really need somebody to talk to, okay? So, who would they send warning signs to? Friends, family, healthcare providers, bankers. It can be something like, I'm never going to get this loan paid off, I just won't kill myself. Or, I'm never going to get this paid off, I just don't think I'm ever going to do this. You know, so it could be something, we'll talk about coded versus uncoded here in just a minute, but it could be something as simple as, if something happens to me, I want you to take care of my wife, Betsy. Or, I'm bringing you my gun because I want you to have it. You know, this is the prized possession. Why are they bringing you their gun? Okay, so when somebody starts giving away their prized possessions, we maybe need to look at that. Okay? Or if somebody wants you to promise to take care of their dog if something happens to them. Why are they doing that? You know, we need to start having some conversations. Okay, suicide crisis survival depends on somebody who understands the warning signs, like a gatekeeper, and who observes that person often enough that you can see them. Because if you never see somebody, you're not going to catch these warning signs, right? So you need to be a frequent enough observer that you're going to be talking to them on a regular enough basis that you're going to catch this. So it could be someone in their family, or it could be a business person or someone that they interact with. All right, so let's see if you can hear this one. Okay, farmers get a rap for being stubborn. I don't know why they would get that. I don't think farmers are stubborn, I just think they're independent.
All right, go ahead. What do you got? A 68-year-old farmer. He was building a fence and started noticing some back pain. Did his wife make him come in? No, he came by himself. He's alone. Yeah, he was worried, so he came right in. Hey, Becky, wake up. We got a farmer who came in voluntarily. What else did he say? Well, I asked him to rate his pain on a scale from 1 to 10, and he just said, I'm here, ain't I? What? Yeah, that's all he said. I don't know what that means, though. That's because you're using a pain scale for normal people. You gotta use the farmer pain scale. Is he gonna be okay? Listen to me carefully. Did he finish the fence? No, he had to stop. Dear God. Peggy, get the crest.
Did he finish the fence? Okay, so that's just kind of playing on some of the things that we were talking about. I think somebody over here mentioned a little while ago, a lot of times when men seek treatment, they seek treatment because someone in their family, often a wife, encouraged them to go, okay? So it's kind of like that. It's like, did his wife make him come? No, he came by himself. Oh my gosh, then something must really be wrong. And that's the situation. If we wait for somebody to actually bring themselves in for treatment, then we're going to miss a lot of people that maybe need treatment, okay? So we're trying to recognize the fact that someone needs treatment and try to encourage them to get treatment if they need it.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so farmers are not stubborn, all right? We're just so used to being independent, and they have to care for not only themselves, but their others, their whole family. And I think somebody else mentioned it down here, that, you know, they're used to being providers. They have to cover everything. They have to take care of their house. They have to take care of their family. They have to take care of their farm. And they're so used to being the one that's responsible for all that. So they're trained to be self-sufficient and self-reliant means that asking for help can be seen as a sign of weakness. Okay? I think you guys alluded to that a little bit ago. Just asking for help can sometimes be seen as a sign of weakness. Also, suicide and even mental illness, even admitting that you have a mental health concern, that you have anxiety, that you have depression, that you're feeling kind of bad, can sometimes have a stigma. And that's what we want to do, is we want to break down that stigma and help people understand that seeking treatment is okay, and there's nothing wrong with it, okay? And then, of course, suicidal thoughts has a whole nother stigma to it that Amy's going to talk a little more about. But in general, and farmers in particular, they may wait until the symptoms are debilitating. So if we're waiting for them to pick up the phone and ask for help, then the condition may become worse and it may get too far. So the people that are most likely to need help are often the ones that are least likely to ask for it. But there are some signals that communicate distress, and Amy's going to talk a little bit more about that. And y'all aren't going to see any of my videos. Okay, so some reasons that why males may not ask for help. Does anybody have any reasons?
Pride.
What is it?
Pride.
Pride. Okay, they're afraid.
Pride. It's in pride.
Pride. Okay. Yeah, they don't want to admit that they need it.
Sign of weakness.
Sign of weakness. Lack of time. You know, I have to take time out of my day. I've got too much stuff to do. I have to not only give up an hour to go see somebody, but I've got to drive there and back. You guys down here may have a lot more things closer by than some of us do. You have to tell somebody what's wrong, and sometimes that's uncomfortable. Talking about feelings is not always comfortable. Another thing is sometimes men don't want to talk to women. How many of you have a doctor that's a woman? Okay, some of you may not have that, but sometimes men don't want to talk to women about how they're feeling or how they're doing, and the majority of therapists are often women. And 90% of men who get help get some because they are influenced by the women in their lives. All right, so this QPR theory is based on an active system, not a passive system. Somebody is hearing something and they are taking action. So the farmers that are at most risk for suicide tend not to self-refer for treatment. They are often go undetected, and they can also sometimes, I think someone mentioned down there that they may even use alcohol or drugs. And when we talk about drugs, it can be something like you had a pain pill from something else and you start taking that just because you're trying to make yourself feel better. And that little cartoon there says, my farm is only looking for somebody part-time. We promise it won't be more than 80 hours a week. All right, so mobile therapies, we mentioned that a minute ago. 90% of people right now are using mobile therapies as often as possible, and that can be just on the internet, or it can still be some telemed services. I think someone down there mentioned veterans a few minutes ago. A lot of times the VA is doing their services online as well. And through online, you can be completely anonymous, and you can also maintain control of the conversation as well. It works really well in rural areas as long as you have internet access. Brian, how's the internet access down here? Do you have pretty good
It's not too bad, is it, folks?
Okay. Some counties
These phones, everybody can.
Okay. Some counties are better than others. This is one site I did want to tell you about, and we don't have time to really go through it very much, but mantherapy.org. This is a really good site. It uses a lot of humor, and the guy that does it is pretty entertaining. There's a self-checkup that you can do on there. It's like a little assessment that you go through, and then it tells you some things like it may tell you that they think you need to refer to some mental health services. But the guy on there, he uses humor, and it's very entertaining, and there's lots of different rooms that you can go into and learn a lot of different stuff. But he uses humor, and he has a British accent, and it's a very good educational site. The handout that we handed you, this one, is also a really good handout. I think this one's maybe from New Zealand, I'm not sure. But this one also has a self-assessment in there that will tell you some different things about yourself. It's a good one to check through, and it also has a lot of information about getting help if you need it. All right, you're up. All right. Okay, so Jody did an excellent job of setting the stage for why we're here tonight and why gatekeepers are important in our farming community. Now you and I are kind of going to get to the nitty-gritty of how we actually offer that help for people. This is what gatekeeper training is all about. And I alluded to earlier, we're going to give you a certificate at the end that you were trained in this program. And this is what we want to train you on. These are the things that we want to accomplish with our program here tonight. You're going to learn what QPR is. We heard Jody say it earlier, but we'll talk in detail about what that means. Each of you got one of these little booklets, and I saw people looking at them, so you might have a good idea already, and that's great. But the important thing I want to mention about the booklet is that we're going to go through this information tonight. It might be a really new topic for some of you. It might be something you've never really thought about before, haven't been to an educational program on before, just kind of blowing your mind a little bit tonight. When you take this home, you have this information to look at later. It's something, you get to thinking tonight, and you start thinking about different things. You have this to refer back to. It has really good information about the theory of why, this training came about and all that kind of stuff. A lot of reminders of the things Jody talked about earlier, why it's important in our farming community, how it's going to work, who's going to use it, and how long does it take to learn it, which that's pretty simple. We're going to get through that tonight. It's a really simple process. What we really want you to know about QPR
that stands for question, persuade, and refer, is that it's a 3-step strategy to get people help without them having to ask for help. We mentioned earlier that can be really difficult for people, right? To have to ask for that help, even if they know that they need it. So this particular program is going to help you help people without them having to ask for it. And we're going to do that, as Jody said earlier, not as experts, just as friends, just as neighbors, just being able to be that sort of intermediate person that can help in a crisis situation to get them to an expert to really walk them through that process. We are going to learn how to recognize and respond positively to someone who's exhibiting some of that suicidal behavior. So not only do we want to be able to see it, right, and to recognize when someone's making comments or things are happening that you wonder why, to help you recognize those signs and then be able to do something about it in a positive manner. Because if we think about it in our minds, we probably think, well, gosh, if I ever encountered a situation where somebody was having suicidal thoughts, I don't know what I would do. It might go really bad, right? If we kind of think about that in the foreground. So we want to help you be comfortable so that it can be a positive outcome, positive situation. We're going to emphasize one more time, because people get really nervous about this. You are not the expert. This is not a form of treatment that we're training you on tonight. It's just helping you understand how to insert yourself into a situation to give people hope and help them find the help that they need. Okay? So we're going to talk about some suicide myths and facts. And actually, I want to stop for just a second and say, so a lot of times when we talk about this subject, it can bring up different emotions in people. You heard those statistics earlier that Jody went through, so it's very likely that a lot of us in this room have had a personal experience with someone who died by suicide, or was in a situation where they were thinking about suicide. So we want you to know that we're here. We're here to talk. We're going to stay after the program. If anybody wants to stay and talk, we're going to be here as long as we need to be here. And it's okay if you're having different emotions, if you need to take a break, anything like that. Perfectly fine. So some of those suicide myths and facts. The first one is that no one can stop a suicide. It's inevitable, right? If somebody's going to die by suicide, it's going to happen. And nothing you or I could say would stop them from doing it. That's what some people think, or how some people feel about it. And what we know is actually the opposite of that. Is that when people are in a crisis and they get help, they get that intervention that we're talking about here tonight, they will probably never be suicidal again. Like Jody mentioned earlier, it's a very situational thing. So if we can just get them through that one crisis period, we are likely to never see that behavior again. Suicide is absolutely preventable. Another myth is that confronting someone about suicide will make them angry or even increase their risk of suicide, right? If we bring it up, if we say it, then that's going to make them think they should do it, right? Or that's going to put that idea in their mind if we bring it up. We are definitely not planting a seed in somebody's mind by bringing it up. And I kind of liken that to, the argument that some people have that, oh, well, if we educate our kids about, sex or prevention and those sorts of things, then we're planting a seed that they should do it. Same concept here. No, we're giving people what they need to not have that situation happen, or to be in a safer situation. Asking someone directly, being very direct, about whether or not they're suicidal actually lowers the anxiety around the topic, right? It makes it something that we can talk about when we bring it up, when we ask about it. It's approachable. We can communicate with someone about it. It opens up those lines of communication and definitely lowers the risk of an impulsive act. Another myth is that only experts can prevent suicide. And so that's what our whole program tonight is about, is that we don't have to be experts. We all, everybody in this room, you and I, can make a difference in that situation. Another myth is that suicidal people keep their plans to themselves. And so this sort of goes back to, sometimes we hear, well, if somebody talks about it, they're not actually going to do it. If they were really going to do it, they wouldn't tell anybody. They wouldn't talk to anybody. These are the kind of things that we can't think of when we're in those situations. We need to understand that just because somebody says they're going to do it doesn't mean they won't. In fact, we absolutely need to intervene. And just because they're not saying it doesn't mean they won't. We need to ask those questions if we're seeing those signs. Most suicidal people do communicate their intent sometime during the week preceding their attempt. So I think we had a comment earlier. Do you think somebody would actually tell you if they're going to do that? The research tells us that yes, they do. They do communicate. And somebody asked Jody a question earlier that made me think of something when we did this training. They talked about the research also shows us that most people, most family members, after somebody dies by suicide, will say, I had no idea. We had no idea. We never suspected a thing. But then when they go back and ask them specific questions, it's an astounding number how many of those people actually made some sort of statement that alluded to the fact that they were going to commit suicide. I think it was 80%, is that right, Jerry? Yeah, it's a high number of people that actually did give some sort of warning or clue that it was going to happen, and people just didn't realize at the time how serious it was. Again, we just talked about this one, that's that myth that those who talk about suicide don't do it. People who talk about suicide actually will try, sometimes even complete an act of self-destruction. Once a person decides to complete suicide, there's nothing we can do to stop it. And we know that actually almost any positive action can save their life if we have someone to talk to them, if we have someone to intervene. Suicide is the most preventable kind of death there is. And so that's what we need to do, is ask the question when we're in this situation, is how can I help? And we're going to get into some more detail, but it can be something as simple as how can I help? What can I do to make things easier? So we're going to talk about some clues and some warning signs of suicide. We want you to understand that the more signs and warnings that there are, the greater the risk is, the more need for action. We have to take all signs seriously, from little to big. And there are a lot of different cues that we can get. So there are indirect, there's direct, there's coded, I think Jody mentioned those earlier. There's a lot of different ways that people will communicate their desire. Some of those direct ways that we see are absolutely just a statement like, I've decided I'm going to kill myself. I wish I were dead. Something that's pretty clear that if somebody says it, we're going to understand that there's a suicidal ideation happening here. I'm going to commit suicide, I'm going to end it all, those sorts of things. But then we also see a lot of indirect language, which are just as important clues. I'm tired of my life and I can't go on anymore. I just want out. Who cares if I'm dead anyway? These sorts of indirect cues, again, are telling us the same intent. And so we have to take them just as seriously. Some warning signs examples. So there are a lot of different people, like Jody mentioned, that might have an interaction with someone who is having suicidal thoughts. So some different things that you might see or hear somebody say to different people in the community, to a doctor, is this medication enough to kill me or to kill someone? To their wife, why don't I just shoot myself and let the bank have this place? This is more of a direct or an uncoded message. To a dentist, when I can't sleep like this, I don't give a shit about life. That's an indirect or a coded message. So the difference here is, one, how that message is coming across. Am I being direct and saying, I'm going to do this, and we're being a little more indirect. And oftentimes too, those messages go across different depending on who they're talking to. So if it is more of a healthcare professional, we'll see a lot more of a coded or an indirect message. Whereas a family member, a spouse, you might see more of a direct message. Some behavioral clues. Any previous suicide attempt is a clue that if that person is having problems, having issues, you notice that they're depressed or they're not acting like they normally do, that's a very good clue that that could be something we need to watch for. Suddenly acquiring guns or stockpiling pills or things like that, if that's not in their nature anyway, if they're not somebody who's already a gun collector or something and all of a sudden they're very interested in guns or getting a lot of guns, something to think about. Anybody who does have any of those co-occurring mood disorders like depression or anxiety, or something like that. So when you couple that with maybe financial hardship or something that's happening on the farm, that's when we need to watch, make sure that we're noticing any cues. Somebody who's putting their personal affairs in order, I mean, that's something we're all encouraged to do, right? Is put our personal affairs in order. We should have wills, we should have all that stuff spelled out. So that alone might not be a clue, but if it's all of a sudden, if it's in a hurry, if it's at the same time as something really terrible is happening in their life, you know, when we mix it in with what else is going on in that situation, that's when this can be a clue to us. Jody mentioned earlier people giving away their prized possessions. I mean, most people don't do that, you know, unless they think that something's going to happen. A sudden interest or disinterest in religion. This is like a lot like the weight loss Jody was talking about earlier. It can kind of go either way. So if it's somebody who wasn't religious before and all of a sudden they're very obsessed with finding out, you know, about religion or what happens to you, you know, in a suicidal situation, do you go to heaven or hell, that sort of thing, those are clues. If they were a very religious person and then all of a sudden they don't want to go to church anymore, they don't want to talk to their church community, their family and friends that go to the church for whatever reason, that's something to worry about. And if we see drug or alcohol abuse or maybe even a relapse after they've been recovered for a period of time, that's another clue that we need to be examining that situation, making sure that nothing more is going on. If all of a sudden we see people that are angry, they're hostile, very irritable, very aggressive, and they weren't before, especially. You know, some people, that's kind of their nature, right? Some people are just a little more angry than other people, a little more irritable than other people. But if we see people that are normally not like that suddenly display those kinds of behaviors, that can be a clue as well. We have what we call situational clues. So, for example, something catastrophic happens in somebody's life. They get fired, they get kicked out of school. Those are big things that can happen to people that are very negative in their life, right? If they've recently had to move and they didn't want to, that can be very catastrophic for people. The loss of any major relationship, so we're not just talking about breaking up or divorce here, we're even talking about losing family members through death and that sort of thing. Friendships, you know, if their best friend moved away, they don't have anybody to talk to anymore. If the neighboring farmer, you know, closed up shop and they don't have someone to talk to back and forth and share their experiences and all the difficulties they're having. The death of a spouse, child, best friend, but especially, the research shows us, especially if that death was by suicide, then we've got an increased chance in those people that are around that person who died by suicide. The diagnosis of a serial or a terminal illness. We see this sometimes. People can't stand the thought of their family having to take care of them having to suffer through whatever terminal illness they may have been diagnosed with. And sometimes people see suicide as an option to not have to deal with that. Any anticipated loss of financial security, and my goodness, I think at the beginning of this program you all were able to throw out a whole bunch of ideas for anticipated loss of financial security, right? I think I heard a lot of different examples of stop coming in, animals dying, fences going down. Brian's barn fell down once when he was building it. He was telling me that story before we started the program. You know, any sort of those devastating things that can happen that are going to have a major impact on your finances. Those are situational clues that we need to check in with people. Are you doing okay? I know this happened. I know you've been through this. Are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help? And then we had the loss of a cherished therapist, a teacher, a counselor, anybody that person talked to. Because as we're talking about tonight, having someone to talk to is what kind of keeps people in good mental health. So when they lose someone who is important to them in that aspect, and they feel like they have no one to talk to, we can see people become hopeless. And that fear of becoming a burden to other people. So that's what we see with the diagnosis of a terminal illness, but it can also be maybe they've suffered a disability like Jody was talking about earlier. Maybe they can't be that sole provider, be that person on the farm that brings in the income. Any situation where people think they're going to be a burden to their family, their spouse, their children, whoever it might be, then you need to check with people. So we're going to talk about some tips for how you can actually ask that question. Because that's what we're telling you tonight, is it's really important to ask that question. But if I ask you, this room full of people, how would you ask that question? Tell me, how would you ask? How would you ask the question if you felt like someone might be having suicidal thoughts?
Are you having suicidal thoughts?
Very direct. What'd you say, sir?
What's bothering you?
What's bothering you? Okay, yes. Anybody else?
You're not thinking of taking yourself out early, are you?
Okay. So I like your humor approach, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. Anybody else? We all think we would help someone in that situation, right? But when it comes down to the how do you do it, then we all kind of freeze up for a minute, don't we? So we're going to talk about that. We want everybody to be comfortable asking that question, because if the only thing you get from tonight is that I need to ask that question, we'll be happy. If you're in doubt, don't wait. Just ask it. I mean, even if you think you're going to ask it the wrong way, just ask it. If the person is reluctant to answer you, be persistent. Keep asking. Ask in different ways. Ask over and over again until you get an answer.
Because there's something I just thought of just a second ago to somebody, and I don't remember who now. If somebody asked you, are you thinking about suicide? And you were not thinking about suicide, what would you say?
No.
No. So, I mean, if somebody is not thinking about suicide, they're just going to be like, no.
Right. And so we often, that's what we worry about. Are they going to get mad at me? Are they going to think I'm weird because I asked them? They're just going to say no.
Well, but I mean, if somebody is thinking about suicide, then they're going to be hesitant or something like that. But if somebody's not thinking about it, they're just going to say no. So if they're not right there, no, I'm not thinking about suicide, then you know there's a concern.
Absolutely. Talk to that person in every circumstance that we can in a private setting. I mean, we all know that people are more willing to talk when they have a little bit of privacy, right? Especially about subjects that are deeper. So if we can, we want to talk to them in a private setting. Sometimes you can't, and it would be more important to ask the question than to not ask it. But if we can get them in that private setting, that's what we want to do. We want to allow the person to talk to us, okay? So this is really important. And I think we even talk about it a little bit more in a little bit, but we, in this situation, the best thing we can do is use our ears and be an active listener. Does anybody know what an active listener is? Have you ever had a conversation with someone and you were talking back and forth about something, and the whole time they were talking, you were thinking in your head what you were going to say next, and you didn't even really hear what they said? I mean, I do that to my husband all the time. We're having a conversation and he's talking and I'm thinking, oh, yeah, but this is what I want to say. This is what I want him to hear me say. So that's not being an active listener. When we talk about being an active listener, we really want you to clear your mind. We want you to hear what that other person's saying. We want you to show them that you are listening. So you're making eye contact. You're not playing on your phone, right? You're not distracted by other things. You're nodding to let them know you're listening. That's being an active listener. And that's what we need to do when we're asking these questions. Let them know they have our full attention. Give yourself plenty of time. So obviously this is not a conversation that we want to rush, right? So we want, if we're going to approach someone and ask these difficult questions, we want to make sure that we have plenty of time to talk to them and for them to talk to us, to tell us what's going on, what we can do to help. And have those resources handy. So we made you, you've got this little booklet, but we also made you a resource sheet. Here it is. It looks like this. It's going to have a whole lot of national numbers on it for help, and then there's some local numbers on the back as well. This is your resource sheet that we want you to keep. So if you don't know who to turn to, you don't know where to go to for help, you have this. And I think the last one on your resource sheet is your local family resource network. Are you all familiar with the Family Resource Network? So they do a lot of services in the area for families and things like that. But what they really are great at is that they're a referral service. So they have all the resources that are available in the county. They'll have them on their website. You can call them and ask for them. It's a great place to go if you need to know what's available in my area for a lot of different things. And mental health providers is going to be one of those. It's going to be on their website. So every area is different, right? So for instance, in Summersville, we have Seneca Mental Health. In Braxton, where I work, we have the United Summit Center. So it might be called something different in your area, but the Family Resource Network is a great place to figure out what those specific things are for where you live, what's available to you. Remember, I said this already, but how you ask the question is way less important than that you ask the question at all. So even if you get it wrong, just ask the question. So that's our first step here, is to ask that question. And some of the ways that we could do that, because we were having a hard time a little bit ago, coming up with how we might ask that, are have you been unhappy lately? These are the less direct ways to ask. Have you been very unhappy lately? Have you been so very unhappy that you've been thinking about ending your life? Do you ever wish you could go to sleep and never wake up? Now for our direct people, which is how some people would prefer to approach the situation, we can say, you know, when people are as upset as you seem to be, they sometimes wish they were dead. And I'm wondering if you might be feeling that way too. You look pretty miserable. I wonder if you're thinking about suicide. I have to caution you, this particular one I have a problem with because I don't know that anybody wants to hear that they look miserable, right? So I might use a different word. I might say you seem pretty miserable. This is the standard set of slides that we get from QPR that we have to use, so I can't change that word, but I do tell people, like, I don't know if you want to go talk about how people look. Maybe we might talk about how they seem miserable instead. And are you thinking about killing yourself? These are more direct ways to approach that question. And if you find that you can't ask it for whatever reason, then the next best thing that I need you to do is find someone who can. Find someone who can ask the question. So we're going to talk about a couple different ways that we do not want to ask the question. One of them is, you're not thinking of killing yourself, are you? Another example would be you wouldn't do anything that's stupid, would you? Or suicide is a dumb idea. Surely you're not thinking about it. And the reason that these three, that we don't encourage these methods of asking that question is because one, we never want to pass judgment. We never want to make someone in that situation feel judged. That would be our number one reason for not asking it that way. And also, the second reason is we don't ever want to encourage them to lie to us, right? So we're kind of, the way we're wording that is, you're not thinking of killing yourself, are you? We're encouraging them to say, well, no, of course not, right? All we have to do is frame it a little bit differently to get a different answer, if that's the case. So instead of, you're not thinking of killing yourself, are you? Are you thinking of killing yourself? So that second part of our program is the persuade. So we've asked a question, okay, at this point. We've asked, we have our answer. Now we have to persuade them to stay alive. So again, we're going to go back to that active listening I was talking about earlier. We need to pay full attention to what they're saying, make sure that they feel like they can talk to us as we work through this crisis moment. We need to remember that suicide is not actually the problem of what's happening here. It's only the solution to a perceived problem that they have going on in their lives, right? So something's happening, and in their minds, they think the only way out, the only way to deal with that is suicide. We don't want to rush to judgment like we just talked about before. We don't want to make them feel judged. Whatever reason, maybe you had your own religious beliefs about it. That's not what we need to share with them in that moment. It's just getting them to someone who can help them is what we really need to do. Offer hope in any kind of form that we can. Right? It's going to be okay. I can take you to someone who can help you. It won't always seem this bad. Any kind of hope we can offer. And then we're going to ask them, will you go with me to get help? So the very best thing we could do is get that person into a vehicle with us and drive them directly to get help. If they won't do that, we're going to ask them, will you let me get you help? So maybe we can get somebody to come there where we're at, or a different situation if we can't get them to go with us to get help. And our third option would be, would you promise me not to kill yourself until we've found some help? So the third step is to refer. So we've asked a question, we've persuaded them to get some help, we've listened to what's going on with them, we've asked them to let us get help. Now we're going to refer them to that expert. And this is where the expert comes into play. You don't have to be that person. There are a lot of people out there that are trained to be that people. We just need to get to that point. But the problem is that suicidal people often believe they can't be helped. So we might have to do a little bit more to get them to that step, right? We might have to do a little more persuading like we talked about in step 2 to get them there. Like we said in that previous slide, the very best thing we can do in this situation is directly take them for that help. Second best would be to get them to commit to accepting help and then making the arrangements for that. And then the third best would be to get that good faith commitment. Any willingness to accept help at any point in time in the future is a good outcome for us.
A quick comment.
Yeah.
I had a friend, I got him in the car, and he decided that, yes, he needed help. And we went by, and his mother talked him out of it. She kept him there, and it got worse. But his mother didn't want to see him at bar H and 4th floor or whatever. So I guess if you get him in the car, don't stop at the house. Yeah.
Right. Don't stop where someone can talk him out of it. Okay, and he brings up such a good point. Why do you think his mother didn't want, do you think his mother didn't want him to get help?
Well, I'm sure she did, but I just didn't, she didn't want the friends and neighbors and the rest of the family to know. that she
It's
had
the
that.
stigma, right? It's the stigma. That's the biggest issue that we run into in suicide prevention is the stigma. People don't want to get help because people will know, people will think bad things about them, right? It's that stigma attached to it. It's the reason often that people don't get the help that they need.
He wasn't just going to do himself, he was going to do about 4 more people too. The boss at work, I mean, he had a list, and he had already camped out, or I retired from the phone company, but he camped out outside the storeroom, and he was going to pick them off. He had a rifle with it. He was going to kill them when they got ready to leave. But then get him loaded up in the car and stuff, and take him down, and Mom says, no, you're David, you're all right, you know, you're being right.
So you've already acted as a gatekeeper.
Well, I didn't, I acted as a friend.
Yep, and that's what, that is exactly what gatekeepers are. I think I said it at the beginning, they're friends, they're neighbors. Just doing the right thing, right? Just offering that hope.
Did he end up doing anything?
You know, that one in the hospital was probably not.
So for QPR, for the question, persuade, refer method to be effective, to be most effective,
Understand that.
we've got to offer that hope that we talked about. So we want to say things like, I want you to live. Even if we can't think of any external reasons, right? If we can't think of solutions to that person's problem, whatever it might be, we can't think of how to save their farm, or we can't think of how to repair their marriage, or whatever's going on in their lives. We can say things like, I want you to live. You're a person and every life is important. I want you to live. Right? We can offer these words of hope and encouragement. I'm on your side. I'll be there with you to get the help that you need. We need to get other people involved. So we can always ask that person, who can help us? And Jody mentioned some things earlier, different people in our lives that can be of help, right? And I think we talked about family and friends and healthcare providers and clergy and those sorts of things. But no one's going to know better than that person who's a support for them. And we can ask them that. Who else can I call to help us? Who can come and talk to you that would make you feel better or make you feel differently? So we can actively engage them to help in that process. We can be part of that team that helps them, but we don't have to be the only person involved. A lot of times there are people in the community that are set up to do just that. So, we're at a church tonight. It is very often clergy members that offer that sort of counseling or support, those sorts of things. We are talking about a lot of rural communities in West Virginia, and I don't know where each of you live, but I'm going to bet there are some of you that live in places where there is no mental health facility right there, or within 10 miles or 20 miles, right? So you might feel like, well, we don't have counselors. We don't have, mental health services in my area. But we do have things like pastors, preachers, priests, different clergy that are trained to deal with these situations. We have law enforcement. We have even our hospitals, emergency departments and things have training to help out in these kind of situations. So if we don't have those direct mental health services, we have other options. And it always helps, if you've been involved in that process in some way to help someone, to follow up, after the fact with a phone call, with a visit, send them a card, let them know you care. Because that can actually save a life. So what we want you to remember is that when you apply QPR, you are planting those seeds of hope, and hope is what helps us to prevent suicide. So I hope, as uncomfortable of a topic as it might be or might have been when you first came in, I hope that we're all getting a little more comfortable with it together as we go through things this evening, because it is very important. And like I said at the beginning, Jody and I are going to hang out all evening as long as we need to. So if people want to talk, if you have stories you want to share, we're here to do that, but I know you guys have been here a long time. Dinner's far gone, right? Everybody's probably getting ready to go home. So we will entertain questions, if anybody has those right now. And otherwise, we're going to hang out.
You need them to fill out anything?
Yep, you're going to do the post-assessment, which is just the back of the pre-assessment that we did with you. And I'm going to pass out your certificates.
Hey, there's a place on there for comments, if you have things that you think we should address in future trainings, or if you think, if you think of resources that we should provide people or anything like that as well.
You're putting on record.
Oh, front part. This is front part.
Hey, thank you all for your time tonight. Some of this may have been a little more information than you expected coming in, but some very good information. Thanks, gals. Give them a round of applause, eh? Kind of reminds me of getting more than what you expect. I was with an old farmer, an old West Virginia farmer, and we were out at this. It was a national convention, and I actually talked him to come along with me. And so we get out there, and this guy from Texas comes up, and the first thing they always want to talk about is how many acres do you have. So he asked the guy that was with him. He said, "How many acres do you have?" He said, "Oh, I got about 25 or something." And the Texan said, "Oh my," he said, "I got a spread at home that I got a horse, and when I get on him, it takes me about a day and a half to ride all over the whole thing." That my buddy there, he said, "You know, I had a horse like that one time, and I got rid of it." So, folks, thank you for your time. Finish filling that out. I've got these certificates here, and if you wouldn't care, help me out by gathering your trash up, throw it away, and put your chair back, and we'll put these tables and we can clean up tonight. But again, thank you for your time.